Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to incorporate the Log4Net logging library into our .NET application. Log4Net is an open source logging framework that is very easy to use and very extendable, and it can basically handle any logging scenario that you want. Log4Net is maintained by the Apache organization. You can find the information right here. Let's go ahead and get started. I've already gone ahead and downloaded the Log4Net API or Log4Net assemblies. I'm going to go ahead and actually add them to our project right now. I'm going to go add reference. Now I've already put the Log4Net files into my library folder. You'll see there's a folder here called Log4Net. Now we've actually added the Log4Net assemblies, we actually want to set it up so we can actually use Log4Net. In our scenario today, we're going to use the ADONET adapter so we actually log to a database instead of the default text file. First thing I want to do is go into my app config file. And I'm going to need to add the wirings in order to get Log4Net to work. So the first thing I want to do is grab. I'm going to copy and paste all this today because I don't feel like typing this. There's a lot to type. I need to create a section handler to tell Log4Net where to find the information. Then next I'm actually going to need to create my section right here. And let's take a look at this. This line right here basically tells the configuration manager within Log4Net how to read the Log4Net config file. And this name here actually correlates to this XML node here, so we know where our Log4Net stuff starts. We're going to be using the ADONetAppender, which will log to our database. Set the buffer size, I'm going to leave it at 100 by default. And our connection type is going to be SQL Server. Let's go ahead and minimize this real quick. And our connection string here has to be a valid connection string. One thing to keep in mind is if this connection string is not correct, like such as your users that have access or you provide the wrong database, you'll not get a runtime exception. Sometimes that's hard to spot and hard to find. So making sure this is a very correct connection string is very important. Next will tell us how to insert our data. This is the default insert statement. It will insert into a default table structure. In future episodes we'll talk about how to modify this so that we can actually create our own table structure with our own columns and our own needs. Then down below we'll actually define each of our parameters. And so log date here matches log date there, thread, log level, and so on and so forth. We can set the different definitions of each of our columns. Once we have all this set up, we're pretty much good to go from a logging perspective as far as wiring. So we actually now just need to build our wrapper. I'm not a big fan of accessing Log4Net or any third-party API for that matter directly within my application. I want to abstract that away because the day's going to come where I'm not going to want to use Log4Net. If I want to use maybe the application block logging or my own homegrown logging, and I don't want to have to go through and change references everywhere. I'd rather do it in one place, one isolated place. So go ahead and close this out. Go into my domain. I'm going to pop something into my configuration folder as I see logging as part of my configuration. I'm going to create an interface called iLogging. I'm not going to use iLog because iLog is also an interface within Log4Net, so I don't want to confuse the two. When you make this public, and for this demo I'm going to only do one thing. I'm going to do a void log exception. And then I'm going to create an override of this where this second parameter is of type exception. Now you could of course add any kind of methods here you want, or you could even make them generic. I like to do things like log exception, log progress, log debug, stuff like that. Let's go ahead and create a derived type. So I'm going to create a public class. Let's go ahead and implement logging. Now because I'm going to be wiring this stuff up via IOC, I'm going to have to do some wiring for that here in a minute. But first thing I want to do is actually create a property that is of my logger. So I'll create a private property here, this doesn't need to be public, called logger. I'm going to create a constructor here. Where I'll do log manager. Log manager is a class within Log4Net's namespace. Get logger. Then here I'm going to use reflection just to grab the current method so that each method call or each instance of this gets its own logger. Okay, current method, declaring type. Now I've actually gone and set up so I'll actually get a logger, but because we're using the XML configuration, I actually need to tell Log4Net to read the config files. So I'm going to do Log4Net config XML configurator.configure. This will actually tell Log4Net to go interrogate either my app.config or my web.config and do figure out how it should wire up the logging, whether it should be to a text file or to a database or whatever the case may be. So instead of doing throw exception here, we actually want to implement this. I'm going to do logger.error because this is going to be an exception. I'll just do message. Then down here I'll do logger.error message exception. Now earlier I talked about it wanting to abstract away the actual usage of Log4Net. By creating this logging class here, I've done that successfully. No one outside of this class knows I'm actually using Log4Net. Let's go ahead and move this to its own class. Sorry, its own file. Now because I wanted to wire this stuff via IOC, I'm going to need to come over to my IOC registration area and actually register this for IOC. I'm using structure map here. You can use any IOC container you want, or none at all if you don't want to use an IOC container. So we've now wired it up so that when I request an instance of iLogging, I'll actually get the concrete instance of logging. Let's do a real quick compile to make sure I can actually still compile and haven't broke anything. No errors, few warnings, no errors though, that's good. Let's go create a unit test real quick to ensure that I can actually create and log something to the database. We're going to ensure that logging works. Now because I'm using IOC here, I actually want to wire it up so that actually I can register all my components. We'll do test fixture setup. I have this thing called IOC Bootstrap. What IOC Bootstrap does is it will actually take a bounce over that real quick. It will actually just register all the IOC registrations within structure map for me. It's a little utility that I use. And here I'm going to do logging. We'll go ahead and ask structure map to give us an instance of logging. Normally I don't like to use IOC within my unit test, especially when I actually want to do dependency injection. But for this case, since I'm actually going to be using IOC throughout the rest of the app to do my logging, I actually want to do that right now. Do logging.log exception. We'll do something went wrong. And we'll create a new exception. Darn. So if I put a breakpoint right here, I should be able to run my test and actually have it logged to the database. However, we have not done one thing. We have not actually set up our connection to the database and our table for it to go into. This script here will actually create the log table. It will create all the different columns for me appropriately. Go ahead and run this, and then let's go over and make sure that I don't have any data in my log. I don't. That's good. Let's put a breakpoint right here and run this. Okay, so I've got an instance of my logger. Let's step through this. It has attempted to write something to the database. Let's bounce back over to my database real quick. Let's see if it did. Sure enough, it did. log the date, the thread, the level, so it's error, the logger, the user. In our case, I don't have any authenticated user, so it didn't put one. The message, and then the exception message. Now, ideally, I could write more tests, and I could actually implement this elsewhere as well. I could even go back to my logger and do things such as log other things other than exception, just create a generic log, and I can log anything I want. I can even log debug, in which case I'll wrap it so it only does logging during debug scenarios. But this gives you an introduction to how to actually set up Log4Net into your application. Let's take a real quick bounce back and look at my config file one more time. Key components here is you'll need to add this section here. Then you'll need to add all of this Log4Net stuff. I will include a copy of this text within the posting so we don't have to retype this over and over again. So I hope you learned something, and until next time.